It is really hot in this room right now, by the way. I don't want to turn the fan on, it's going to ruin the audio, but fuck me. Hello. Welcome to my bare, empty, sad walls. I literally look like I'm in an institution. No, this was just renting a property in the UK. Welcome back if you've been here before, and if this is your first time, welcome. Thank you for joining. Welcome to my very first video in my rereading challenge, which is a challenge where I set myself to reread what I used to consider to be my favourite books. There was a list of 14 books, however I'm going to count this as a 13-book challenge because I actually reread one of those books last year, so it is disqualified. The first one I decided to tackle was City of Bones by Cassandra Clare, the first book in the Mortal Instruments series. If you've clicked on this video, there's probably 3 categories that you can fit into. One is that you're someone who subscribed to me, you know me already, and you're here to support. 2 is you just randomly fell upon this video, which is very unlikely. And 3 is that you're a fan of the Mortal Instruments series by Cassandra Clare. And if you fall into the 3rd category, I'm sorry, it's probably not going to be the best video for you to sit through and watch. So for those of you uninitiated with the Mortal Instruments series, City of Bones is an urban fantasy set in New York City and follows our main character, Clary Frey, who one night after witnessing a murder in a local nightclub is drawn into this secret world that she never knew she was part of. This murder is committed by these 3 teenagers covered in strange tattoos holding these weapons that she doesn't recognize, and then the body disappears. She finds out that there is this secret race of demon hunters called shadow hunters. And yeah, that's kind of the basic premise, where she's brought into this fantasy world in order to go find her missing mother. That is a very brief overview of the first book at the very least, and this was published back in 2007. Honestly, you can tell. You can tell this is a mid-noughties book. Overall, what I'm going to say is that this is very juvenile writing, with some overwriting at times. It is not amazingly well written, and I'm going to say that the majority of people who are still fans of this book to this day, who read it when they were teenagers, will acknowledge this. This isn't the most well-written book. It is there for entertainment value, it is there for the nostalgia factor, which is what I went into this book expecting and hoping for. My main issue with this book nowadays, I'd say, is that the characterization is just weak and it is boring. Everyone is stuck in this jealousy chain. Everyone is jealous of each other 24/7. You have our main character Clary, who's just so consistently jealous of another character called Isabel, who's kind of this sister figure to her love interest. So it doesn't make that much sense. Maybe at the very beginning where she misconstrues their relationship, but it's made pretty clear by her love interest, Jace, that is a sister figure. They're not interested in each other. Isabel is then revealed to be jealous of Clary, our main character, for being so, A, flat-chested, B, brave, C, doesn't care what other people think of her. Very stereotypical female main character traits of someone who is supposed to be, presented as this kind of not attractive, not like other girl main characters. This is what I mean by it's very mid-noughties. You then have Alec, the somewhat brother figure of Jace, our love interest, who is jealous of Clary because Alec is gay and likes Jace. But Clary doesn't really fully figure this out. Maybe around halfway, 3/4 through the novel, she figures this out. So he's just being like fucking insufferable for most of the book towards Clary. You then have Simon, Clary's childhood best friend, who is jealous of Jace because he's this sexy, ripped, golden-haired angel boy who Clary is very clearly attracted to. And Simon, of course, childhood best friend, is in love with Clary. And then you also get Jace, who gets jealous of Simon for being so close, being a childhood best friend of Clary. It is just a fucking mess. And I think perhaps this is what happens when you have your main character repertoire is a bunch of teenagers who are all somewhat intertwined and somewhat attracted to each other. So yeah, if you're a fully grown adult, it can be quite frustrating, quite fucking boring to be reading about all these teenagers being jealous of each other. Another thing that I found quite funny, especially towards the end of the book, is that apparently these children, these teenagers, I think 15 to 17 maximum, this is the age range of our main characters, are apparently quite good at overpowering fully grown adults. And another thing is that going back and reading this as an adult, when you read this as maybe like a 13-year-old at the very beginning of when the series came out, is that I'm uncomfortable particularly when it comes to Jace and Isabel as characters being written as these like gorgeous, most beautiful people ever, when in the book they're 16 to 17 years old. A giving benefit of the doubt is the fact that as a teenager yourself, you would probably see other teenagers as these rippling gods, especially if they're fit and golden haired and also, you know, half angel. But reading it as an adult, it is a little bit strange, because you're sat there like, oh yeah, this is what just a lot of young adult fiction is. You get a lot of teenagers who are just written as like the most attractive people in the world ever. Circling back to the age point, there is this, I believe, centuries old warlock character called Magnus Bane, who, not so much in the first book, there are sprinkles, there are hints, me knowing how this book series ends up as a whole, this character is interested in a 17-year-old Alec. This, again, is very representative of a lot of YA fantasy from the mid-noughties onwards. It is a bit strange. I'm not gonna yuck someone's yum, but it is strange as an adult to be reading about centuries-old warlock beginning to thirst shows a romantic interest in a 17-year-old child. Like, oh my god, why? And that used to be my favorite ship as well. I used to love Magnus and Alec together, and looking back, now I'm like, ugh. Ooh. Anyway, going back to some of like what I'd say are the root issues of this book is that Clary, our main character, is just not a very likable character. She becomes very hard to root for and to empathize with. She's obviously very headstrong, very stubborn as a character, and sometimes that can work to your benefit, but she's just not she's just not written as likable enough for me to even care too much about her struggles. Like, I very much listened to this book with the knowledge that, like, we're just progressing through the story here. Like, I don't really care too much about Clary's feelings. She kind of just blusters her way through the entire story without seemingly caring too much about other people's feelings or thoughts. There is a little bit of self-awareness, I'd say, from Cassandra Clare here, where Simon's character, even though he's just so pathetically written, he says something along the lines of, "You've always gone and done things and left me behind. Like, I am an afterthought to you." So it feels like there's a little bit of self-awareness there for Clary's character and how she's written to be so stubborn and so driven that she tends to leave people behind and forget people's thoughts and feelings, almost honestly forget other people's existence around her and how her actions impact those around her. But it's not enough for her to become a likable character. This book is not entertaining enough to have an unlikable main character. There's also obviously the glaring self-insert of Cassandra Clare into our main character, Clary, who many people have drawn attention to before. It's just so incredibly obvious when you do a reread when you're grown up. One thing that really stuck out to me, and I'd say would make her so unlikable, I really, really hated Clary's rivalry with Isabel. I hate how this is written. It's just so incredibly heavy-handed. I suppose it is well placed for mid-2000s books, but it didn't sit well with me. At times, it just felt misogynistic and forced, feeling of like, Isabel's so sexy and she wears skirts and she's tall and her hair's all glossy and she's beautiful, and I'm here flat-chested like a little goblet in the corner. And any interaction that they had in this book was just fueled by Clary's jealousy, and Isabel's just written as like this very empty, vain character, and this kind of strange rivalry that happens between them is very conveniently quickly solved by the end of book one. It did not age well. So I approached reading this book very differently from how I ever would have. I did this via audiobook. I'm not an audiobook person. It drives me more to have a physical book in my hands. I like the fact that physical books are kind of all-consuming. You can't really do anything else whilst you're doing it. It takes up your time. It is a very intentional hobby to have, to read a physical book. However, I did really enjoy the fact that I could listen to this audiobook whilst I was cooking, cleaning. I even listened to it when I was playing a game, a full-on video game, which is probably not great. I won't be listening to too many audiobooks going forwards because I don't like the fact that I could do a different hobby whilst I was supposed to be reading, but it is probably also indicative of how engaging this book was for me, is that I could play a whole video game with text on the side and still follow the main story of City of Bones. And to be so honest, the voice actor for this book was not great. The only way I could get through this book was to listen to it on 1.75 times speed. One comment that I have about the VA is that one of the characters, Hodge, who is an older man, her voice for Hodge was fucking bad. It was like this gravelly, very forced, like, I was gonna do an impression there. I'm not gonna force myself to do that impression. It was genuinely hilarious, and I laughed whenever Hodge was in the book and had to speak. Okay, after talking about the entire book about being fucking terrible, I forced myself to write down some positives. So I ranked this book 2 stars out of 5, mainly ranked for the nostalgia factor. It was very strange to simultaneously remember so much and so little of this book. I think a lot of this was also heavily influenced by the fact I don't think I read this book after I watched the movie coming out in the cinemas, and the movie rearranges some of the major plot points of this book and puts like the vampire hotel fight, for example, at the end. I think in the movie they did it just because they wanted some type of kind of big fight finale to make the movie more interesting, but that happens like maybe a little over halfway in the book, so I think that affected my experience of the pacing of the book, where I sat there thinking, this is almost done, like we're about to wrap things up, and it just felt like it dragged on, honestly. And I don't know if this is just something from like these YA urban fantasies from the 2000s where they fit so much in one book, and you had like 6 to 7 books in one series just to wrap up these things that are not that super interesting to read. Again, I found these things so interesting to read as a kid. So this is a thing. These are books for kids, probably. And that was my final point that I wrote in my reading journal, was entertaining for teenagers, I guess. It's a glowing review from me. That wraps up my thoughts on my first book in the rereading challenge, City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. I am questioning my past taste. It does not hold up to the hype I gave it, but I found it entertaining as a kid, and that's what matters. In any case, if you enjoyed, it would be great if you could stick around to watch the rest of my rereading challenge or any other videos that I made. And I hope that everyone found this entertaining, enlightening, a recommendation to not read a book, or maybe to go and read the book. I promise I do not sit here and shit on all the books that I read. This is very specific to this series. And I will hopefully see you in the next video that I make. Bye bye!